Hey there, listeners. Well, I interviewed a guy by the name of Nathan Hight, and he's the co founder and managing director of Safe 365. Now, that's an international award winning risk management and insurance tech company that really enables thousands of businesses to reduce harm to their workers by becoming proactive in managing work related risks. Now, he and I had an awesome discussion. Now, Nathan shared the thing about, because actually it was a really rich conversation. And he talked about being the reluctant leader, training operationally and equipping emotionally. But one thing he really talked about, which I really loved, which was about connecting with a common purpose. And so, as I said, it was a rich conversation with Nathan, and I think you're going to really enjoy it. So it's good to be back with the interviews. So listeners, let's get into this one.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas.
Hey there, listeners. Welcome to another wonderful episode of the Leadership is Changing podcast. Great to have you here with me. I've got an awesome guest with me. His name is Nathan Hight. Nathan, a massive welcome to you.
G'day, how you doing? It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Now, one of my very first questions I asked my guests, which is, whereabouts in the world are you today?
I'm in a beautiful neck of the woods called Whangamata in the base of the Coromandel Peninsula on the east coast of New Zealand here. So, pretty fortunate place to live, I'd have to say.
Yeah, very good. And so for people around the world who are listening to whereabouts you are, Whangamata, based in New Zealand, but is it an area whereby it's very much a beach type of resort area, a coastal area, surfing, things like that?
Yeah, look, picture this. We've got a 4-kilometre stretch of beautiful white sand beach, some of the world's best surf breaks, beautiful blue water of the Pacific Ocean. We've got some of the most beautiful native bush with mountain bike parks and tramping and bushwalks, and a small, very tight-knit community of about 4,000 or 5,000 people. So, yeah, it's a sensational place to live, work, and play, and also a fantastic place to raise a young family.
Yeah. And now that's in the Coromandel. Is that opposite Hahei?
Yeah, we're just about 30 minutes drive south of Hahei, for those that know the iconic hot water beach area of New Zealand, one of the most visited parts of the country, just about half an hour south of there.
And can you catch a boat across?
No, I don't have a boat.
But is there a ferry that goes across?
Yes, yep, you can get a ferry from Whitianga up the
Oh,
Coromandel over to Ferry Landing and then head out to Hahei, Hot Water Beach, and check it all out.
yeah, very good. Excellent. I around that time, New Year's Eve, where we went to a new world. I'm not sure which whereabouts it was, but the queues were right from the checkout right through to the end of the shop on every aisle of people waiting. We couldn't even get a trolley. It was crazy. It's an awesome place to be.
Did right. It's the other side of things is it is a pretty cool place. And so when Christmas, summer holidays roll around, and obviously in the Southern Hemisphere, that means it's summertime, everyone having their time out with their family, and they all love coming to Whangamata here. So I think the flex in the town's population is about 4,500, 5,000 all year round. And then through summer, it bumps up to about 45,000, 50,000 people. So pretty hectic. And hence you pick your time when you go to the supermarket and things like that.
Yeah, true. It's true. Hey, Nathan, you're the co-founder and managing director of Safe 365. What I'd like you to do is tell us a little bit more about Safe 365, what the organization is, but also more about your background, because I know that you've been, you're a company director, you're a certified professional risk manager, you're a sports scientist. Tell us more about you.
Yeah. So Say 365 is a business that my business partner Mark Kidd and I started in 2016, and we did it to fundamentally help organizations move from being reactive to much more proactive in the way they think about risk and the way they particularly look after people in the modern era that we're in. And there's a huge cost of harm globally, talking sort of 3.7 million people don't go home from work from a fatality perspective every year around the world. And 380 odd million people have an accident where they have up to 4 days off work, which is a massive cost, about 4 trillion US per year. Major issue out there, and that never sat well with me with my background, which I'll talk a little bit about, because fundamentally I knew that a lot of that is preventable. And not only is it preventable on a social level, but there's a huge amount of business value tied into looking after people. If your workers are engaged, happy, healthy, safe, they're productive, they're loyal, and they're going to deliver a great outcome for you in your business from a business performance perspective. So always had that philosophy. So our mission with Say 365 is, can we get 100 million people into proactively safe work environments on a global level. And if we think we can do that, then we think that's pretty special in terms of what that would mean in terms of harm reduction, insurance performance for those businesses and those individuals, and actually the business productivity gains as a result of that. So that's what we're doing. We're 7 or 8 years into that. Where that sort of came from, just a little bit more about me personally. I started thinking about public safety as a volunteer surf lifeguard here in Whangamata as a 14-year-old, where it's a magnificent volunteer movement, surf lifesaving. They save, in the New Zealand context, 1,600 people a year get rescued that are recreating around the coast, and that's down to, by and large, our volunteer surf lifesavers. And they've been doing that for over 100 years. And when you think about how surf lifeguards perform their role, they put out those iconic red and yellow flags. And they show people the safest place to swim on a beach, on a patrolled beach. But what they do throughout that day is they're constantly thinking about risk. They're thinking about who are the sorts of people that are on the beach today? What are their backgrounds? Do they look competent and comfortable around water? What are they wearing? Are they wearing the right sort of things to recreate safely? What are the conditions doing? How is the swell or the wave type changing as the tide changes with sandbars and the wind and things like that? And all of those attributes contribute to risk on a beach. And what surf lifeguards do magnificently is they recognize that risk in real time, and they take action proactively to stop things turning into an incident or someone getting harmed. And it's a really quite an amazing global movement that's been doing that effectively for over 100 years. And so I got involved with that as a 14-year-old, and on about the 5th or 6th day on the job as a volunteer, a chap had a major cardiac arrest, an elderly chap. It was the 4th or 5th of January here in Whangamata. So there's about 10,000 people on the beach, middle of summer, 25, 30-degree day, and all hell broke loose when that happened, as you could probably imagine. And I was a junior lifeguard on about day 5 or 6, and so I was part of a bigger team doing that response. But the team put 5 shocks through that gentleman's heart on the beach and saved his life. A helicopter had to come in, medevac him out, and he walked back into the surf club some weeks later to thank us, which was a pretty special moment for someone at 14. You think, go back to what you were doing at 14, the stories that you'd be telling to your mates at school and things like that. Well, what did you do in your summer break? I had a pretty different type of story to share, which was really inspiring to me. So I got really caught up in surf lifesaving, hook, line, and sinker. There's nothing I wouldn't say yes to. Opportunities for learning and development, new courses, learn new skills. And then it was about 15 months after that, when I was 15, perhaps the flip side of that coin, where a lot of the seniors had left some of us juniors in charge, and about 2 or 3 kilometres down the beach, just out of sight of the main beach, a lady went into the water, had a heart attack, and we had to pull her out. I was actually the person running the scene as a 15-year-old that day, and we did CPR on that lady for 90 minutes before I was telling the husband and 2 daughters that unfortunately they'd lost their mother and wife that day, which was pretty tough for someone at 15 to actually manage. And so that the agony and ecstasy, if you like, in terms of the impact you can make as a surf lifeguard. But what it did do in me is it really lit a fuse at that time around wanting to really help people and look after people out there, particularly for things that are just entirely preventable. And so I went about learning about how to do that. And actually I found in surf lifesaving, how the heck could someone my age have to experience those sorts of activities? And so I was almost a bit angry about that. And so I started to naturally want to drive some change in that organisation so that we weren't exposing 14 and 15-year-olds to that type of traumatic incident, because it's not a good thing at that age. And so I went on this journey for the 20 years or 25 years since of making those changes at local, within my club, within my local region, within the national body, within the international body, and went on to participate in developing global drowning prevention strategies and all sorts of really cool things that have made a really big impact over a long period of time. I would say that from a personal perspective, like I've always been a pretty reluctant leader. I grew up in a semi-rural Waikato, typical New Zealand kind of home. Mum and Dad were salary and wage earners. They worked really hard for everything we ever got. I was fortunate to get a pretty good education, but have had to work really hard. And so I think surf lifesaving for me was a real turning point in my life that gave me a real sense of purpose. And that sense of purpose I think has really unlocked a lot of the things I've been able to contribute out there over the years ever since. So I sort of got going, and along the way I did some studies, as you pointed out, with sports science, and I studied risk management, enterprise risk management up in Singapore. I've studied governance and done company directors training and things like that as I've grown a little bit older and looked at things differently and appreciated the value of good governance. And then obviously when my professional career in surf lifesaving started to wrap up, having been the GM of Surf Lifesaving New Zealand and then Surf Lifesaving Australia, was looking at what I wanted to do next. And that's when sort of Mark and I were having a talk about it. Hey, I think there's this opportunity business owners that were in our network were really struggling with how they could effectively look after people. And I thought, what a great opportunity, because one, technology is a great way to democratize access to wisdom and direction and understanding. But also, it shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard for someone who owns a business who's not a risk professional or a health and safety professional. It shouldn't be that hard for them to understand what good looks like in terms of looking after their people. And I think, in all honesty, probably amplified by New Zealand attitude, a wee bit of that sort of she'll be right mentality. We've got a beautifully innovative economy, and we come up with some magnificent innovation here in New Zealand. But it does come at a bit of a cost, in that we also love taking shortcuts. And in this context, those shortcuts often are work health and safety, and it means we often see quite preventable harm occurring in workplaces around the country. And so I think, working really hard to try and overcome that in a New Zealand context has really helped with what we're now doing around the world, in the UK and the Middle East and in Australia and so forth. So that's how it's panned out thus far.
Wow. I don't know about you listeners, but I'm going like, whoa, this is awesome. And what Nathan is sharing with us. Nathan, I've got a few questions based on what you've actually just been saying. First of all, 3.7 million people being hurt, I think is what or not actually. Fatal every year, right?
Yep.
That's a huge amount of people, right? So that's one thing. But the thing is, for a 14-year-old, 15-year-old to be thrown in the deep end, excuse the pun, but I think that's what happened. And they must have processes and systems in place to teach people how to do this surf life-saving and that. And then when crisis hits, or there's a situation that hits, you go back to those processes and systems to help you move things through. Is that how it works?
Yeah, going back, you're talking 25, 27 years ago now, and things have changed a heck of a lot. And I'd like to think I've contributed to a lot of that change. But back then, it's probably a bit like, think about some of our emergency services or even armed forces. The operational training gets very good. So they train you how to do the thing you need to do in the heat of battle. And in a surf lifesavers case, that's throwing yourself into a hazardous environment and you're retrieving somebody quickly and then trying to resuscitate them and getting them off to a rescue helicopter or an ambulance generally.
Yeah.
And so that side of it is very good. But what they didn't used to think about and prepare you for was, then what? Because if you think about mental health and well-being these days, the speed of research and development of this area, we're all, as leaders, thinking about mental health a lot more than we probably ever have. And I think that's probably the big learning moment for organizations like Surf Lifesaving and forces and emergency services is we need to train these people operationally, but also we need to equip them emotionally from a psychological safety perspective in order to continue and sustain providing these sorts of services to the community. So that's been a bit of a learning exercise for me.
Yeah, good. Because that's actually a good segue into my next question. Because when we talk about health and safety, it's a bit like organizations talk about diversity and inclusion. The diversity gets a lot of attention, but the inclusion doesn't. And it's sort of there. Health and safety, I sort of understand the health piece.
Yep.
What is that? What is that piece? And for an organization, for leaders to think about that health piece, what would that be?
Traditionally, the health part was things like exposure to substances like long-term exposure. So we think about asbestos or silica dust and things like this. Temperature, if you work in a hot environment for a long period of time, or you're doing a lot of shift work and your circadian rhythms getting upset a lot because of doing a lot of night shift work and things like that. So those are all the traditional health things that were considered in the health and safety equation. More recently, we've had things like transmittable diseases and things like that flow into it with the pandemic. But I think the sleeping giant that's really come to life has been the psychological health and well-being and psychological safety, psychosocial risk management. And that's now come into the health and safety world and is probably by far the biggest risk for most organizations looking at their risk register is how well are our people and how well are we setting them up for success in that area with the way we design the work that they do for us.
Yeah, very good. Hey, awesome. Great you're sharing all that. Now, leadership, obviously as a 14-year-old and 15-year-old and doing what you did would be probably one area, but how did you actually get into leadership yourself?
Yeah, as I said, I'm not naturally extroverted. I've learned to talk and express myself over time, but I wouldn't say it's natural for me. The surf lifesaving opportunity really for me, I think my parents would have been pretty stoked when I got involved with it because the underpinning values and what it teaches you in terms of like human being competencies is unbelievable. It just really grows great humans, that organization, anywhere in the world where you see that movement. And I think for me, it started to give me a bit of probably confidence in myself. It gave me a sense of purpose. And you've talked about some of the events that I was involved in there. But what that started to do as a result of those incidents is I started to want to change something because I wasn't satisfied with the way it was. And so all of a sudden I found myself at AGMs within the local club saying, hang on, actually someone else should be doing this. There's a better way of going about it. And then all of a sudden someone said, oh, you're a leader. And it was like, oh, I suppose I am, but yeah, that's great. Let's just get on with what we're trying to achieve and more or less progress that way for a long period of time. And I did get my first probably formal access to leadership sort of training through Surf Lifesaving. They have a national leadership program where they identify talented or interesting people coming through the organization. I think from those days it was 18 to 25-year-olds they'd look at, and they ran a 2-year program, and they brought people in from outside the organization who were CEOs or sports people or coaches or personal development coaches and all these sort of different types of people, and they exposed us to them so we could apply that knowledge within Surf Lifesaving, but also to help us in our life and our pathway outside that organization. And so through that, I was just incredibly fortunate and grateful for someone to show that level of interest in me and give me that opportunity. I embraced it because I thought, heck, I'm not going to get this chance twice, and just really immersed myself in it and found myself to be reasonably good at it. I've always had a pretty good logic brain. I can think about things pretty logically and understand cause and effect. But I'm also pretty good at reading people and naturally get a sense whether someone's happy or sad or on board or not on board or what their body language is telling me. And those are things that have probably been a little bit more intuitive, which I've learned to work with a lot more over time. So through that, and then I was fortunate to get a role. My first kind of professional role from a leadership perspective was in Surf Lifesaving New Zealand, where the local region at the time, Wellington, the capital, they were having a few challenges and there was changes happening in the organisation. And the national CEO, a chap called Jeff Barry at the time, said, hey, we know you're interested. We think you do a great job. It's a small organisation. There's a few problems you've got to try and solve, but we think you do a great job. Would you like to come in as the manager? And you're going to report to a board of directors, which I didn't even know what that was at that time. And I really thought that was the best thing since sliced bread, and immersed myself in that role, worked really hard because of just the sheer passion and purpose for Surf Lifesaving, and learned a lot about governance, how to report to a board, what a strategy is relative to a tactical plan, learned about budgeting and financial sort of stuff, and just really made a good fist of that and really loved it. Worked myself into the ground and eventually burnt myself out after about 4 years of doing that, transformed that organisation as a result. And then it was on to leadership roles within Surf Lifesaving New Zealand at a national level, eventually moved my way up into being the general manager at 25. We're talking 4,000 or 5,000 volunteer lifeguards running around the country, and there's a 25-year-old inexperienced guy who's setting the policies and creating the direction for the organisation where it's going in terms of how it approaches drowning prevention around beaches in New Zealand. So it's a lot to take on, but I never really stopped and thought about the magnitude of it. It was just, that's just the next thing to do, and that's part of my purpose, and on you went. And so I suppose probably kept reasonably humble on it and just been really focused on the purpose and continued to do that. And then some of the process in Australia, over in Australia, they lost a couple of young lifesavers, which was really sad. And ultimately, coronial inquests and things like that have run their race. But ultimately, it was really a poor culture of reactive approach to risk management, which is totally and counterintuitively opposite to what the organisation exists to do, right? And that's why it hurt so much at the time for that organisation. But so I was involved in a project there with Surf Lifesaving Australia. So you're talking 55,000 lifesavers every weekend running around beaches in Australia, and just trying to just reset the culture there around. Let's remember, our lifeguards are everyday people. They're just their mums, dads, their brothers, sisters, their tradespeople, their white-collar professionals. They're all walk of society are our lifesavers. They're not superhuman. They're people. And so some can swim really well, some can't swim that well. Some are great at first aid and resuscitation, and others are better on the physical side of things and decision-making, etc. And what that organisation identified is that they weren't necessarily making good risk-based decisions because of this perception about the superhero kind of concept of lifesavers. And so helping to really reset that was a really rewarding, really difficult exercise in leadership, especially probably being a Kiwi over there in Australia and suggesting maybe there's a few different ways of doing things. That was a good learning experience, but got some wonderful Australian friends and colleagues from those days, and we're still very close to them today. So that's how we went through. And then cool. These days, over the last 8 years with Safe 365, again, much like Surf Lifesaving, very clear purpose, very strong purpose-driven business. We look at our impact just as much as we look at the financial performance of the company. Some of our people reflect on their role, even some of our salespeople, about the impact they make on people as a result of the software that our clients use, not necessarily hitting their numbers in terms of their sales forecasts and things like that. So we are a very balanced business. And a lot of that is reflected just through my experience, and it's in my DNA to look at things that way.
Very good. When you went to Australia and, of course, having to get in there and help the culture, even in New Zealand, and then probably even something that you do with clients today to help them and their cultures around things and resetting things. How did you find it, like in Australia? How did you actually get people to come on board and go on their journey?
Yeah, I think ultimately connecting with them on that common purpose. Would you like to be part of a world where it looks like this? Or do you want to stay doing what you're doing the way you're doing it? And so I think being able to help people see that there is a better way, or there's a better future for them if they're open to looking at things differently, is probably the key way I did that. I think because in that particular area, that organization, I had a lot of lived experience that I could point to, which a lot of the services, whether they're armed or emergency services, is credibility with the team, with the uniforms, etc. And so that is part of it. And I was able to draw on that rather than perhaps someone else externally coming into the organization saying, you're doing it wrong, you should go in this direction. And that's not the message I gave them either, but it's more a case of, hey, do we think we could do this better? Do we want to make sure that we attract, for the next 100 years, we can attract lifesavers and make sure that while they're out there looking after the community, we're looking after them? Simple as that. And it's no different in a workplace with what we do with our business. It's, hey, we're going to hire this group of people to come in and create value for our business and create value for our customers. The least we can do is think about how we can best look after them. And why wouldn't you want to do that?
Too right. Oh, very good. They're awesome. And I like what you just said there is connect on a common purpose. I think it's very important for leaders to understand that and utilize that a lot as well. Now, this person could be alive or from history. Who's your favorite leader and why?
Yeah, I saw that question, and it's a good one. And I think anyone who's probably worth their salt would struggle to name one, because you take so many little different influences from different people. But for me, I think about this. There's a group of leaders. You've got your Gandhis, your Lincolns, your Martin Luther Kings, your QE2, Queen Elizabeth II, who all of those had a real one. They were resilient to the course that they were heading towards. Very clear, strong, purpose-driven people. Generally, not all the time, but generally got there peacefully in terms of through dialogue and debate rather than more aggressive approaches to getting there. So I think those are all attributes that really resonate with me. Winston Churchill, just for sheer determination to the objective and the passion just to keep going towards that objective. And sometimes there's things that we do that feel hard, out of reach, and just really difficult. And having a leader who can just, no matter what, keep the North Star visible for everybody and get there, I think is admirable through a really difficult time like he existed in. And then I love a lot of sporting analogies, and there's a lot of people listening will be familiar with the All Black kind of brand and All Black legacy. And for me, the person who's probably contributed the most to that but has the least profile is a chap called Wayne Smith. And he's just a remarkable individual because it's not about him. Very humble, very servant leadership, makes it fun for the players in the game, makes it enjoyable, but equally sets a really high standard for excellence and what it takes to be successful. And I think that's a lot of that All Black way of doing things. I think he's got lots to do with that. And the quiet achiever who's happy to sit in the background and enable others to succeed, I think are things that resonate with me on that.
Have you met Wayne Smith?
I have met him, but that was when I was playing first 15 rugby, and we were having a training session with the All Blacks some years ago at Hamilton Boys High School, well-known rugby school around New Zealand, and we were sponsored by Philips, bizarrely enough at the time, and the All Blacks were also sponsored by Philips. And in one of the Bledisloe Cup test weeks, they got 3 or 4 schools to line up and have a 15-minute live training session, each of us against the All Blacks. And I can tell you that was a jaw-dropping experience for a young rugby player in those days, playing against guys like Jonah Lomu, and Wayne Smith was coaching that group.
Yeah, wow. Hey, if you and Wayne Smith were sitting on a park bench having a coffee together, would there be one question you'd love to ask him?
I think it'd be one question that would go in for a multiple-hour conversation. What makes you tick?
Nice.
What makes you tick? Because I think if you really sit down with someone and have that conversation, you really find out a lot about somebody. You find out about their background, their attitudes and values and beliefs that they hold dear, that shape the way they think about things. Yeah, and it can be a pretty revealing experience. And I think what makes you tick, you could answer that superficially, but you could sit there for hours talking about that. And I think that'd probably be the question I'd ask.
Awesome. Hey, look, Nathan, the show is called Leadership is Changing. When I say that title or that statement, what does it mean for you?
I think ultimately, if you're leading people, and so I think about the people I lead, and I think what's going on for them in their world, and society's changing. politically, it's never been probably more divisive than it is, particularly in Western democracies. You look at the way where those people get their information to shape their attitudes, values, and beliefs. There's a lot of social media influence there. So people are perhaps forming views that are based on dicey intelligence or information. So you've got to be really tuned into that. I think people are much more tuned into their own well-being, which is great, and so they should. And so leaders got to be really across that one and really checking in with people on how they're going. The lines around work versus home are completely blurred, particularly post-COVID, where we're all, am I working? Am I on my time? Am I on your time? Is that a work thing? Is that a personal thing? Those lines are truly blurred. And I think leaders have got to be really cognizant of that and recognize that my job doesn't stop when my team go home or when we hop off the Teams call or whatever it might be. So I think that's a major change. I think the abundance of data is massive. So using data to make good decisions. There's so much of it around. Getting the stuff that's reliable and that's going to generate some sort of decent insight is really important. That's obviously pretty central to what we do with Safe 365 for our clients from a risk management perspective, is how do you provide leaders with good intelligence, good data, so that they can make really positive decisions for their people. I think a lot of the traditional ways of leading have eroded, particularly through an overlap with COVID, maybe some more difficult economic times more recently, the political divide out there. I think people have a lot of uncertainty in their lives. There's a lot of knowledge out there, but I wouldn't say there's a lot of wisdom. So there's a lot of information out there. You can go and teach yourself how to do anything on YouTube or AI or whatever it may be, but I still think there's a bit of humanness that's really important to that in terms of how we interact with people. Particularly, I think making sure that as a leader, you understand yourself first and foremost, but then also you're helping other people to understand who they are, because probably one of the most revealing things for me in my development in leadership has probably been the time I've spent with some very dear friends of mine who have a real focus on developing self-awareness and really in a deep way. And I think the more I've been tuned into myself and understand how my attitudes, values, and beliefs are getting shaped by what's around me in the world, that's made me a fundamentally better leader, and it's allowed me to understand other people a lot better.
Yeah. You know what? Actually, just based on what you just shared there, which I think is brilliant, is earlier on you actually talked about thinking, the cause and effect type scenario. And you're saying that leadership, a lot of it, the traditional stuff. Do you feel leaders today are thinking enough? Are they critically thinking, or are they just on what I call autopilot? They just go day in, day out. What are your thoughts?
No, I don't think they are. I think people are not going bone deep in the way they think. They're tending to look for data points that validate their original idea, rather than looking at is that actually really what that data is telling me or that insight is telling me? It's like the old sample size of one. I've got an idea. I'm going to go find someone who's going to say, yeah, it's a good idea. Then I'm going to form a view that therefore it is a good idea because I've validated it. I think there's a lot of that around. I think part of the other piece of that critical thinking is I've noticed that people struggle with conflict a lot more. And I'm not in the sense of I don't like you, but conflict of ideas. So we can have a conversation in a work context and you might say red and I might think blue. And that's great. We can have a conversation about that and debate it and have good discourse and hopefully flush out a great outcome. But it may actually take a bit of an edge in that debate and for that beautiful outcome to drop out of it. And I think an observation for me is that people struggle with disagreeing with people. And we're getting maybe poorer at being able to unshackle a difference of opinion, a contest of an idea from an individual as a human being. And I see that in our politicians out there all the time, where all of a sudden someone's actually not necessarily seen as a good human because they have a different political view as someone else. And I just think that's crazy. And if you go back and talk to some of the politicians of yesteryear, they'll tell you that they would disagree with someone until they're blue in the face in the House and debate an idea, but then they'd go have a beer with them over the road at the parliamentary bar, and they'd actually get on really well as human beings. And I think we've got to try and find a way to regain the essence of that, because I think that's where true diversity actually adds value. Diversity doesn't add value if you're not going to listen to the ideas that are being pulled into the conversation. And so you've got to have a really open mind and be prepared to be wrong or have your original idea shaped in a different way, not be too fixed on it, rather than looking for that validation point to just confirm what you always thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. I think that's so spot on in what you're saying there for sure. Hey, look, you know how you talked about data before as well, and I think that the world's getting faster in the way of technology is driving it a lot. Even if you think about your software, that you've got. But if you think about technology, business, data, even from a social perspective, if life is getting faster and faster, how does a leader be successful in that fast-paced, ever-changing world?
It's really difficult. It's really difficult. I think you've got to reach a degree of comfort that you're not going to get it right all the time. I think you need to be really discerning about where you take your insight from. I think you've still, the fundamentals around the self-awareness, going as deep as you can on your own self-awareness. I'm a big advocate of seeking first to understand before seeking to be understood, because I just think it's such a powerful tool for people. If you know yourself and you understand how your behaviors are shaped, then you're inherently far more able to connect with someone and ask and listen to them to understand where they're coming from, in order to find that common ground, to build that fundamental trust that's needed between two people in order to then have a meaningful conversation and go in a direction together. It's, even though the world's changing and all the data and is out there is high, I think that fundamental is still very strong, and it needs to be very strong for leaders to be successful, because it's still a contact sport. We're still working with other human beings. They've got different attitudes, perceptions based on their world, and understanding that is a really key attribute in order to work with them.
Yeah, I heard a friend of mine, he actually talked about it on stage recently. He said that it doesn't matter about artificial intelligence and how much of it you've got. If your business isn't strong and you don't have a strong core business, it doesn't matter what you put on top of it, like AI, that ain't going to work. And so you need to make sure, and I think it's the same with leadership, that strong fundamental side of things too has got to be there. The core's got to be there. And for people to, and the fundamentals, it's got to be strong for people to be able to lead as well going forward.
And I think, like, knowledge is abundant. Like, you can go find information out there, but that doesn't necessarily translate into like wisdom. And I think it's all in the name, artificial intelligence. It's artificial. So it is intelligent, it's very clever, and it does help solve a lot of practical challenges around consuming a lot of information and synthesizing what the themes are from it, things like that. So great, I'm a massive fan of it. We use it within our organization to help what we do, but it's in the name. It's artificial. And I think that needs to be used in a balanced way with actual genuine human intelligence. And it's not about how much, it's actually how you're able to translate knowledge into the world and contextually make it relevant for people. And I think there's an undeniable role that human-based leadership isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's going to become probably more critical.
Yeah, it probably is. I think it's going to, there used to be a saying many years ago, hire the tech, hire the touch. And so I think it's just based on what you just said there, I think it will go higher. From an employee's perspective, you and I to change lens here and start thinking from an employee's perspective, has their expectations of leaders changed?
Yeah, I think that has, and I think it's changed within the spectrum of age spectrum as well. So it's changed generally, but that change has been different depending on the age and stage of the people in your team from an employee perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly the younger generation, the future, that we need to make sure they're developed, and they're going to be holding the keys to the cupboard. So we've got to make sure they're equipped for that. I think part of the challenge is perhaps they're not as equipped as they may be led to believe they are. And the expectations of people to do things and be involved in activities where perhaps they haven't necessarily got the foundational depth of knowledge or comfort or experience, I think is a challenge, because you want to build people up and give them those opportunities and grow them. But equally, some of the things that you're doing impact on people's lives. And it's important that people have got the experience and the ability to pause and reflect at the right time on things, and some of those little micro skills that are really impactful over time. So I think particularly the younger group they're pushing, let me at it, and maybe aren't as strong as listeners as perhaps the generation before them and before them before that. And so I think that's a challenge. I think people think about their lives pretty holistically, and the role of a leader in a work context is no longer just when they're at work. It's actually beyond that. Where are they going in their life generally? What's their direction? What's their personal situation? How does that affect the way they come to work? And so I think there's a much higher expectation that employment-related leaders, managers, etc., are across these sorts of issues.
Yeah.
But it's a challenging one. I think authenticity is really critical in the eyes of younger people. I think none of these, by the way, are specific to younger people. I just think that there's more of a trend in that age demographic versus perhaps some of the more older folks coming through. But that authenticity is, people see through shallow leaders probably much more than they might have 15 or 20 years ago. Actions matter a lot more than words. Words are pretty cheap and easy, but actually actions, I think people are looking at leaders in a much more discerning way and seeing how they behave and what they do to ensure that there's alignment there between what they say and how they behave. And so there's hypocrisies has run out of town very quickly in organizations with leaders, whereas maybe 20, 30 years ago, there's more of a hierarchical approach in employment.
Yeah.
And so if the boss said it was grey, then it's grey. Simple as that. No question. You don't challenge authority, those sorts of things. And I think that different ballgame in 2024. If the boss says grey and actually I think it's blue, then I'm going to have a conversation with that boss and tell him it's blue. And that's where the listening part needs to probably come in and say, actually, it might actually still be grey or maybe something different. And so that's the difference, is that expectation that, you better be on to debate this, because, I'm not going to just take it at face value because you happen to be older than me, or you've got a C in front of your job title or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's good points. Very good points. If you were to get your crystal ball out now and think about the future, where do you see leadership being in 5 years?
Good question. I think it's still in that whole knowledge. Knowledge is abundant, but wisdom isn't. So I think for leaders, it's thinking about, we've got the big sort of the data age, the AI age, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of conflict coming in around the world at the moment. That's expected over the next 5 years. I wouldn't imagine that's going to dissipate. If anything, it might get more intensive. So lots of different views for people. So I think the 5-year kind of horizon is, how does a leader in a modern world handle that and synthesize it into, I suppose, a clarity in the way they work with people. I think the competencies for leaders to understand a broader range of diversity is going to continue to be a major issue. I think understanding kind of ESG concepts and recognizing that people don't come to work necessarily just to earn a dollar. A lot of people come to work to make an impact on something.
Yep.
That's changed a lot over the years. And so I think staying on point with some of these trends is going to be a major challenge. And then look at who's actually training those leaders for tomorrow and where are they coming from. Because I see and observe, and we work with quite a few thousand businesses around the planet at very senior levels, and you can see it sticks out like a sore thumb, the leaders who are yesterday's leaders in today's environment. And you're just going, there's some risk there around those senior levels of organizations. And then I look in 5, 10, 20 years from now, and I'm one of those people around one of those tables. And so how do I make sure that I evolve fast enough to be relevant and add value and ultimately help people around me be successful, make the impact on the purpose that matters to me as best I can? And there's some challenges for all of us, I think, in how we do that.
Definitely. And I think part of it is, and the role, the responsibility for us as leaders is to be able to pass that torch on.
Yes.
And that knowledge, but also the wisdom piece. And I love what you said before is about knowledge is abundant, but wisdom isn't. And it's about that experience, that wisdom, that maturity of understanding what to do in certain situations, even though you've got some knowledge or maybe a lot of knowledge, but really cool to think about. Hey, Nathan, you want to say something?
Yeah. I was just you raised a really valid point there around like passing the baton on. So one of the things that I did probably about 5, 6 years ago is I reached out to a couple of the leaders who had mentored me back 20 years or so earlier. And I just felt compelled to just acknowledge them personally. I haven't really necessarily talked to them for a number of years. And I reached out to them and said, hey, look, I just want you to know that you made a real impact on my life. And as a result of that, you've helped me achieve some things which are really cool. And I said, if there's ever anything I can do for you, let me know. Any way I can add value. And both of those people both said the same thing, which was pay it forward.
Yeah.
Pay it forward. Identify the next versions of you and help them in the same way that we helped you. And if you do that, then you're transferring a lot of great knowledge and capability into the next generation, and they'll benefit from that. Yeah. So I thought that was a really good bit of wisdom.
It is. Pay it forward leadership. Awesome. Sounds like a book. That'd be pretty cool. It's really good stuff. Hey, very good. So Nathan, look, thanks for joining me on today's episode. If our listeners are wanting to get hold of you, where should they go?
Probably 3 options there. You can send me an email, nathan@safe365global.com. You can jump on our website, www.safe365global.com, or look me up on LinkedIn, Nathan Hight, Hight, no E in Height.
Yeah, excellent. We'll put those links into the show notes, listeners. But Nathan, once again, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a real pleasure talking to you.
No, thanks very much. Pleasure to be part of it, and thanks for me on the pod.
Yeah, excellent. There you go, listeners. What a great episode that's been. Are you willing to pay it forward and pass on that leadership side of things as well? Because you could be thrown into the deep end, or maybe you have, but how do you react? The ability to connect on a common purpose is really important. And the other thing too is actually to understand that knowledge is abundant, but wisdom isn't. Hey, thanks for joining us. Until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Dennis Giannoutsas. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.